Hello, Story Store listeners. Before we start this interesting story, please subscribe this channel, Story Store, and hit the bell icon. Thank you. Now here we go. Stood in the long-term parking lot, my suitcase wheels grinding against the asphalt, boarding pass tucked into my coat pocket. I was meant to be on a flight to Seattle, bound for my sister's cabin by the Sound, where the holidays promised laughter and the clink of wine glasses. But a jolt stopped me, sharp as a snapped wire. I'd forgotten Edward's Wilthy original, not the photocopy I kept in the kitchen drawer. It was still in the safe at home, its weight more than paper. I turned the car around, telling myself it'd be a quick stop, 10 minutes at most. What I walked into instead was a sound no parent should ever hear, not in their own house, not from their own child. The front door sighed as I nudged it open. I didn't call out. The air inside was heavy, too still, like a room holding its breath. My keys stayed clutched in my hand, not tossed into the ceramic dish by the door as usual. Something in my gut tightened, a warning I couldn't name. My boots brushed the hardwood floor, soft as a whisper, as I moved toward the den. Voices drifted from within, low and measured, like they were picking their words with tweezers. I stopped just outside, pressing myself against the wall, my breath shallow. "If she's slipping, we can build a case," said a voice I knew too well of in my son. His tone was calm, professional, the way he sounded when pitching a deal. "She's 72, another voice replied, smooth and unfamiliar. "With the right paperwork, proving diminished capacity is straightforward." That name Carver Evan had introduced him months ago. A lawyer friend who'd offered to help after Edward's death, sorting through estate details I hadn't asked for. My pulse slowed, heavy, like it was sinking into my chest. I couldn't see their faces, but their words carved out a shape I recognized. They were discussing guardianship, about me. Evan's voice picked up again. "I've been keeping track. She's been forgetting appointments, misplacing keys, repeating herself." My grip tightened on the keys, their edges biting into my palm. I wanted to storm in, to demand answers, but my feet stayed rooted. Instead, I backed away, silent as a shadow, careful not to let the floor creak. Outside, the late autumn sun was too bright, too warm for the chill spreading through me. I slid into my car, staring at the dashboard, keys still in hand. The woman who'd raised Evan Hood worked double shifts at the city records office to pay for his engineering degree, was now a checklist in his plan. My lips pressed tight, not from anger, but from a hollow disbelief. That moment, something in me shifted, not broke. Not yet, but tilted. The trust I'd carried for Evan, the last warmth of a mother's hope, began to cool. The worst part wasn't what I'd overheard. It was realizing how long I'd ignored the signs. If you've ever watched someone you love become a stranger in your own home, you'll know the weight of that silence. That was the day I stopped being a mother first and started becoming something else entirely. I didn't head back to the airport. I didn't call my sister. I just drove. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my thoughts drifted, untethered. I passed the freeway exit and let muscle memory guide me through streets I hadn't seen in years. Neighborhoods where lampposts still leaned the same way. Eventually, I stopped in front of a small cafe, wedged between a dry cleaner and a pawn shop, with a flickering neon sign. The awning was fresh, but the scent spilling from the open door clove, vanilla, warm, daube, pulled me back 2 decades ago. Edward used to bring me here every weekend, back when we lived in a cramped apartment on Maple Avenue. When Evan was still a boy with dirt on his elbows and a head full of questions. I stepped inside. The counter gleamed, modernized, but the tables were still a patchwork of wood and metal, each with a tiny glass of wildflowers. I ordered a tea and settled by the window, my fingers wrapping around the mug's warmth. Outside, people hurried by, scarves tucked tight against the wind. I pictured Edward at this same table, folding his newspaper while Evan built castles. From creamers, asking why planes stayed up or how swollen shut, how clocks ticked. He never wanted easy answers. He wanted schematics, equations. I'd scoured library books for him, underlining passages in pen, signing him up for science workshops before he even knew they existed. He'd been curious then, not calculating. Somewhere along the way, that boy had changed. Not in a single moment, but slowly. Like a tide pulling out. I remembered the first signs of N insisting on managing Edward's estate, saying it was too much for me, switching our accountant to a firm he recommended, setting up automatic bill payments without my input. I'd seen the clues, but chalked them up to care, to love. Now, sitting in that cafe, the pieces clicked together, a puzzle I'd been too trusting to solve. I left the tea half-finished, its bitterness lingering not from the leaves, but from memory. Outside, the sky had dulled to slate. I pulled my scarf tighter and stood still, not ready to face home yet, not out of fear, but because I needed to remember who I was before. I let others redraw my edges. The library parking lot was nearly empty when I pulled in, the sky bruising into dusk. I parked in the same spot I used to pick when I worked there years ago, instinct guiding my hands. Inside, the library was quieter than I remembered, the hum of fluorescent lights softer, but the smell, parchment, dust, polished wood felt like coming home. I bypassed the new self-checkout kiosks and headed straight for the records room. It was unchanged, same towering cabinets, same flickering bulbs. I nodded at the clerk, a young man with wire-rimmed glasses, and requested access to a document I'd archived long ago, Wong's original will. He didn't ask questions, just handed me a form and pointed to a table in the corner. The file was easy to find. My fingers still knew the system. The folder was heavy with Edward's notes, his precise handwriting filling margins with dates, arrows, and shorthand only I could decode. I spread the pages out, scanning each line. The will was untouched, no alterations, but a small note caught my eye, stuck to the inside cover. Margaret, if you're ever uncertain, the truth is in the figures. I flipped to the final page, a detailed chart of assets, properties, accounts, bonds. Beside each, a notation M, to retain. M or Evan, only with verified legal oversight. No full control to son. Edward had been meticulous. He'd trusted me. Heat rose in my chestnut rage, but recognition, like slipping back into a coat that still fit. I pulled a notebook from my bag and started listing. Copies of documents, independent counsel, audit of recent financial changes. Each item was underlined with deliberate pressure. By the time I left, the sky was a deep indigo. The cold didn't touch me. I walked to my car, my breath fogging in the air, feeling not old, not lost, but like Margaret hailed, a woman who'd cataloged rare manuscripts, who could recite zoning codes by heart, who'd once found a misfiled land deed in a cracked drawer. I'd find my way back, one page at a time. The next morning, I moved with purpose, though my pace was slow, deliberate, as if staging a scene. I tucked a tiny voice recorder, barely bigger than a key, into my coat lining, its old library interview battery still good. A single red blink, then it vanished into the fabric. I left the front door unlocked, letting sunlight spill across the kitchen tiles. I brewed tea, left a small spill on the counter, and nudged the kettle, subtle signs of a woman unraveling. By 10:15, Evan arrived, unannounced as usual, carrying a grocery bag and that practiced smile he used when he wanted something. I sat at the table in a loose cardigan, a half-solved crossword splayed before me, a pen without its cap. I looked up slowly as he kissed my forehead, remarking how drafty the house felt. I mumbled about forgetting the thermostat again. He unpacked soup, bread, a tin of cookies, and began his routine. He asked about my sleep. I said it was patchy, trailing off mid-sentence. My fingers fumbled the spoon. When he offered to heat the soup, I nodded like it was a kindness. He moved through the kitchen, eyes flicking to the calendar, the vitamins by the sink, the stack of unopened mail. He mentioned a bill from the utility company. I said I'd get to it later. He offered to sort it. I didn't answer. After lunch, he leaned against the counter, studying me too long. Then he spoke, his voice soft as a lullaby. About care facilities he'd researched, places with art classes, courtyards, staff trained for memory issues. He said it gently, like he was offering a gift. I blinked, smiled faintly, said it sounded nice to have someone else handle meals. Then, I asked what day it was. His eyes softened, satisfied, as he cleared the table. I stared out the window, the recorder catching every word, every pause, every calculated care. When he left, I locked the door, sat in the den, and set the recorder on the desk. My hands were steady. I replayed his words, not out of hurt, but for clarity. Silence, once suffocating, was now my strength. I found Clara's number in an old address book, tucked behind recipe cards. We hadn't spoken since Edward's passing, not from a falling out, just life folding inward. Clara had been my colleague for 20 years at the city archives, always spotting cracks in a plan before they split open. I left a voicemail, my voice even, asking for a legal mind I could trust. She texted back within the hour. She'd be over by 3 o'clock. When Clara arrived, her presence was steady, not overpowering. Her gray coat was crisp, her hair neatly pinned. No small talk, no forced warmth. We sat at the dining table with mismatched mugs of peppermint tea. I slid the recorder and Edward's will across to her. No preamble. She listened to the recording, her face unreadable. When it finished, she met my eyes and said, "We'll handle this." She opened her laptop, fingers quick, asking about my power of attorney. Had it been updated since Edward? No, she nodded. First, we'd revoke Evan's authority. Then, a new will, a trusted executor, and state notification. Everything timestamped, logged, secure. She asked about digital backups. I had none. "We'll fix that," she said. Over the next hour, Clara mapped out a plan, clean, quiet, airtight. Everything Evan assumed I'd forgotten, I was about to reclaim. She scanned Edward's will, set up encrypted cloud storage, and labeled a folder Margaret Legal Secure. She showed me how to log medical reports, which versions to keep. Before leaving, she handed me a single sheet, a revocation of Evan's power of attorney. I signed it. She tucked it into her bag and said, "This is step 1. After she left, I stood by the window, watching the bare maples sway. The house was quiet, but not empty anymore. It was the sound of something being rebuilt, one choice at a time. The days that followed were precise, like shelving books in perfect order. Clara's checklist was memorized by day 2. I scheduled a visit with Dr. Harmon, my physician of 15 years, requesting a cognitive assessment not from doubt, but for proof. He didn't hesitate, running tests, checking reflexes, reviewing my history. He handed me a letter, cognitively intact, no deficits. I tucked it into a folder I now carried everywhere. At home, I gathered evidence of my clarity. Receipts with my handwritten notes. Bank statements, emails from the past 3 years. I sorted them into files: legal, medical, personal, label. With the precision of my archive days, each page was scanned into Clara's cloud system, time-stamped, a fortress of proof. Behind old coats in the closet, I found a box marked Edward Hale. Inside were letters, mostly early love notes. Grocery lists, his scrawled initials beside mine. One stood out, dated 12 years ago, folded tightly. "Margaret, if Evan ever makes you question yourself, trust your gut. You see more than you know." I sat with it, the house still, my pulse even. Edward had seen a shadow I hadn't. Now, I did. I backed everything up twice, sent copies to Clara, and stored a flash drive in a bank vault. In my journal, I wrote, "No such thing as too prepared when someone tries to rewrite you." That night, I slept without leaving a light on, the locks unchecked for the first time in months. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was building. Evan appeared. Unannounced on a Tuesday, a paper bag in one hand, a cluster of daisies in the other. His smile was the same one he'd flash after sneaking cookies as a boy. I let him in, placing the daisies in a blue vase. He remarked on the house's stillness, calling it calm. I agreed. He unpacked soup, a baguette, a jar of jam, moving through the kitchen like it was his. We sat, and he asked about my health, my sleep. I said some nights were better, letting my words drift. He watched me closely, noting the unopened bills, the calendar's blank squares. He offered to organize them. I looked away. Then he spoke of care homes again, places with libraries, yoga, private suites. His voice was soft, like he was offering freedom. I said I'd think about it, my fingers tracing the table's edge. He offered to drive me to one next week. I murmured, maybe. I asked what day it was. He answered, pleased. He lingered, pointing out a loose cabinet knob, a dim bulb. I nodded, noting his notes. Before he left, he squeezed my arm, saying he only wanted my safety. I patted his hand and said I knew. From the window, I watched him sit in his car, typing into his phone, lips moving slightly. The recorder in my coat had caught every word. I labeled the file, Evan visit, care home pitch. His performance was polished, but mine was sharper. The next day, I rearranged the living room, tucking a second recorder under the coffee table, angled to catch porch conversations. I left the fridge door ajar, placed a mug in the wrong cupboard, mussed my hair just enough. At 10:50, Evan returned, humming as he climbed the steps. I met him on the porch, pulling my sweater tight, asking why he was back. He said he was just passing through, handing me a brochure for a care facility. I held it, letting my hands tremble slightly, not opening it. We sat on the swing, and I asked the time. He answered gently, sitting close, describing the facility's gardens, its piano lounge. He mentioned Carver, his lawyer, saying they'd discussed filing papers to avoid confusion if my health declined. I nodded, eyes on the street. He took a call, stepping away. Through the open window, I heard him mention Carver, accelerated review, capacity concerns. He said I was nearly ready. I sat still, the porch recorder catching every syllable. When he returned, he handed me tea. I thanked him, said it tasted like something Edward used to brew. He nodded, silent. He asked if I wanted to visit the facility Friday. I said I'd consider it. After he left, I retrieved the porch recorder, uploaded the file, Evan Porch Talk, legal plans, and stored it securely. That evening, Clara stopped by with her tablet. We backed up everything twice, encrypted. I showed her Evan's brochure. He'd underlined a line about medical proxy transfers. Clara handed me an affidavit of my mental capacity, signed by Dr. Harmon and 2 notaries. The tide was turning. Evan thought he was gaining ground, but I was mapping his every step. 5 days later, Clara filed a response to Carver's office, a thick packet with my cognitive affidavit, a new power of attorney, an updated will, and a notice voiding prior authorizations. All dated, signed, duplicated. Not an attacked defense. She delivered it by hand to Carver's office above a pharmacy, leaving it with the desk clerk, requesting it reach him directly. That night, she called, her voice steady but edged. Carver had contacted her after receiving the file, not to argue, but to withdraw. He mentioned a favor Edward had done him years ago. No details, just enough to crack Evan's plan. I reread Edward's note that night, tracing his words. You see clearer than you think. The next morning, a courier brought a letter from Carver, typed on crisp letterhead. He was stepping back from my estate matters. Enclosed was a record of all filings tied to me over the past 8 months, including Evan's. The documents were meticulous. Dates, logs, drafts, emails. I read them slowly. Phrases from Evan's kitchen talks appeared verbatim in a guardianship proposal, complete with templates for neighbors to report my memory lapses. He'd been building a case in the shadows. Now I held his blueprint. Clara and I planned the next move, a statement of intent, warning that any further overreach would be flagged as coercion. I placed Carver's letter beside Edward's note in my desk drawer. 2 men, one who tried to undo me, one who left me a lantern. The silence in the house felt different now, not heavy, but grounded, like a partner. Evan arrived unannounced a week later, a folder under his arm, his stride careful but tense. I watched from the window, noting the strain in his shoulders. His concern was thinner now, stretched over something harder. I opened the door, stepping aside without warmth. He commented on the scent of nutmeg from the cider I'd warmed deliberately. I poured 2 mugs, handed him one, and sat across from him. The table felt like a chessboard. He mentioned Carver's sudden exit, saying it left things murky. He hinted at paperwork changed without his input. I sipped my cider, then pulled a neat stack of documents from the drawer. The new power of attorney, the revised will, Dr. Harmon's letter, the notarized affidavit. I slid them across, one by one, no flourish, just facts. He didn't touch them, just stared. I met his gaze, not angry, not scared clear. I've made my own choices, I said. Legal ones. I know exactly what I'm doing. His jaw tightened, his eyes flicked to the hallway, searching for proof I was bluffing. I said, silence isn't always weakness. He stood frozen, then gathered the papers, set them down unfolded, and left without a word. The door closed. Softly, I stopped the recorder hidden under the table runner, labeling it Evan Confrontation. Full clarity. That night, I dreamed of a tidy room labeled Files, open windows, clean air. My choices were mine again, and that was enough. The house began to hum with life. Clara's niece, Lila, arrived on a sunny afternoon, carrying a duffel and a laptop bag. She moved through the house with quiet ease, setting up in the spare room, stacking books and binders with care. A grad student in records management, she had Clara's steady cadence. By dusk, the house felt warmer. Lila made tea, humming an old jazz tune, the scent of chamomile softening the air. Her typing echoed from the guest room, steady like Edward's old typewriter. She took out the garbage, labeled my photo albums, and offered to digitize my old work journals. I handed her copies of my legal files on day 4. She secured them on an encrypted drive, adding backups, treating each page like an artifact. Evan called that evening. I let it ring, no voicemail. Lila and I labeled garage boxes the next morning, her presence a quiet yes to moving forward. The house felt lived in against smudged windows, scuffed floors, a teacup by the sink. I wrote in my journal, the house breathes, and so do I. The air turned crisp, the trees outside whispering with certainty. I sat at my desk, journal open. Its pages heavy with truth. I'd walked back to myself, not with fanfare but with steady steps, each choice a stone on a path I built alone. I wrote, let him speak first, then watch him unravel. I closed the book, tucked it beside Edward's note, and slipped the key into my pocket. Lila's mug sat by the sink, its warmth lingering. The house was alive fingerprints, footsteps. A flickering lamp that settled into a steady glow. Outside, leaves turned gold and green, no audience needed. Something had ended, not my story. Just the part where I waited for someone else to shape it. If this story stirred something in you, perhaps it's because you've felt that same quiet, not weakness, but survival. If you've ever been underestimated, doubted, or made to question your own mind, I hope this reminds you that your strength doesn't need applause. You're not alone in that stillness, and you never were. If this resonated, share your thoughts or carry this story with you a little longer. Where are you watching this from? Please like, share, and subscribe to Story Store for more stories that matter.